Good morning and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. My name is Tom Luongo, and as always, we have a lot to talk about. This is episode 30, and I have with me today my guest that I had on episode 15. So it's kind of like, I guess we'll do this every 15 episodes. Former director of the Office of Management and Budget under the Reagan administration, David Stockman, is here with me this morning. We're going to talk about, well, our complete and utter frustration with the coronavirus, COVID-19 lockdown, and everything else that's been happening. As always, really happy to have David on the show. So, David, how have you been? How are you dealing with the lockdown and all of that stuff?
I'm locked down and just marveling at how over the deep end this whole thing is gone. You know, this is a hysteria that makes the McCarthy Red Scare looked like small potatoes. And I say, I don't really see anything since the Salem witch trials of 1692 that's even close to this in terms of the level of public irrationality and excess fear relative to what the problem is, what the phenomena is. I don't think we've had anything like it before. Sure, COVID-19 is real. It's a super winter flu. It is very bad for old people with one or more serious already life-threatening conditions, heart conditions, respiratory conditions, diabetes, and so forth. But the data is overwhelmingly clear that society could handle this in a far more targeted and rational way without shutting down the economy, and especially this economy, which has no immune system, you know, after 30 years of money printing and massive debt creation and all the malinvestment and harm that's been done to the economy. It now lives hand to mouth. Most businesses have no cash reserves. Most households, live paycheck to paycheck. It's a hand to mouth economy. So the worst thing you want to do is shut down a hand to mouth economy for no good reason. And that's exactly what is happening at the present time. Now, I have one fact that, we can start the conversation with. It's all out there, and the mainstream press is so damn lazy that they don't even look at what's in front of their face, really. And the politicians, particularly the Republican politicians in Washington, are just laying over and allowing what I would call the infectious disease lobby and the Democratic mayors and governors to run them over. Trump is a deer in a headlight on this, and we can get into that more later. But here is the data from the epicenter of the whole global COVID-19 pandemic, so-called. It's New York City. They've had rates both of reported infection and death that are orders of magnitude different than the entire rest of the country and the world. So if you've got some data, as I said the other day in my blog, if you've got some data from New York and it's stunning in its clarity, then you got to take it pretty seriously, because there's no place that's going to show anything different. But here's the data through, I believe, 3 or 4 days ago. And you have to look at this in terms of if you want to get focused on this whole death thing, which unfortunately we have to, because there's, the crawlers on the bottom of the cable screens that update by the hour as kind of the fear statistic, I guess we could call it. Mm-hmm. So let's take that one. The population in New York State under 30 years old has had a death rate of 0.8 per 100,000. In other words, per 100,000 people under 30 years of age, they don't even have one death yet, 0.8. And on the other hand, if you take the population 80 and over, there have been 4,600 deaths, and that's a mortality rate per population of 1,214 per 100,000. In other words, the difference between young people and the very old who have all these comorbidities and other conditions they're coping with anyway is 1,500x. So if something is in, you take the age groups in between, and you just get a rapid, a slowly ascending increase in the mortality rate, but it doesn't really get anything extraordinary or out of the normal risks of life until you get to people 70 and over. But again, if it's 1500x between the young and the very old, then how in the world can one size fits all be the right solution, the right public health solution, so-called? And that's really what lockdown nation is all about. One size fits all. Everybody stays in their house, and you don't go on the street unless you absolutely have to get to the grocery store or something like that. And in the process of imposing that draconian lockdown nation solution, we're really destroying the economy. We're creating conditions that no one's seen since the 1930s. And actually, this is worse, as everyone, I think, probably recognized by now. In 4 weeks, we had 22 million unemployment claims. People see these big numbers on the screen, but let me tell you how big that is. That's the same number as all the jobs allegedly created since 2010, and the entire recovery, according to the BLS, wiped out in 4 weeks. That number is 10 times larger than the worst 4 weeks during the bottom of the Great Recession, so-called, in the winter of 2008, 2009. And everybody said the sky is falling and, the whole economy is heading into the drink at the time. And this is 10 times worse. So if we look at the data, there's a lot more to talk about in terms of the health statistics and that data. But if we see something that's 1500x between old people and young people, the obvious answer is protect the old people. And we know who they are. They're all on Medicare. We know, we have all of their medical records. The doctors who are caring for them know who they are. They could have gone after all of these people with a few 10 billions of dollars and basically done the best, that could be done with all the money and, welfare state infrastructure we have today. And you would have done far more than what we're doing now, shutting down the economy and spending, trillions and trillions and trillions trying to make everybody whole for the shutdown orders that governments have given. So, we're at a moment of irrationality. We're at sort of April, May 1692. Now, I'm sure everybody hasn't studied the Salem witch trials, and I haven't either, but I think it's interesting to note that the first accusations by these two young girls, they were 8 and 11, happened in January 1692. The first trials happened in April. The first hangings occurred in June. And by October, Reverend Cotton Mather and his father, who was president of Harvard, increased Mather finally said, enough is enough. This is crazy. Stop it. And it eventually did. I think we're running a worse track right now than actually happened way back then, before we had Twitter and all the other things to make irrationality spread with lightning speed.
Yeah, I was going to say, Twitter is an anxiety pump.
Yeah,
it is the tool of the anxiety pimps to pump and dump, noradrenaline into people's systems and just make them and turn them into unthinking, poof-flinging monkeys. And that's my contribution to the conversation this morning. Poof-flinging monkeys. You've touched on a number of things in that, and it's really obvious to me that while I'm watching this play out, that I've been saying, even when I wasn't thoroughly and utterly disgusted with what I'm seeing, when I was keeping an open mind, and I say early in this process, back in late January, February, even into early March, I said, okay, well, look, let's respect the virus. Let's respect the situation as best you can. If you need to voluntarily self-quarantine, me and my family, we did, when we didn't know anything about the virus and how deadly it actually was, when we didn't have good information coming out of China, because the Chinese wouldn't give us good information because they were obsessed with saving face about how many people were actually dying. When all of this stuff was happening and nobody knew anything, then erring on the side of prudence on an individual or even town by town level makes perfect sense. But once we're getting into the real numbers, and you eliminating the real numbers for the worst case scenario, which is New York City, I can tell you here in Florida, the numbers are they're shockingly uninteresting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, shockingly uninteresting. The whole state, 405 deaths. My county and Columbia County, there's been 4 people diagnosed with it. We had our first case, person die in Alachua County, which is where the city of Gainesville is, in the University of Florida. So University of Florida, a hot spot for international travel and all of this stuff that wasn't shut down until the middle of March, right? 1 death finally at North Florida Regional the other day. First one, okay? And we have a massive medical infrastructure in Gainesville. It's we're a secondary nuclear target because of Shands and our and because of our medical infrastructure in the city of Gainesville, FYI, in case you guys didn't know that. Yeah. So, but by contrast, and everybody there, if you walk around town, everybody's wearing a mask in the communist, the People's Republic of Alachua County. You go north into Columbia County, you go up to Lake City, which is, I kind of live between the two of them. You go up to Lake City, which is a rural town, and they're all farmers and stuff. They're all walking around without masks on. They're all like, hey, why isn't this place open for lunch? They're all going to Lowe's, they're all doing their thing. And it almost looks like business is normal. I mean, some people are wearing masks here and there, but for the most part, when I go out, which isn't often, but when I go out, I see this, I'm just like, life is just, the only difference between Lake City now and 2 months ago was the level of traffic is a little lower than it was before. But people are just ignoring it, and they should, because there's 4 cases in all of Columbia County. And by the way, Columbia County is huge. It's 80 miles or 90 miles long, for Christ's sake. It's insane. Yeah. So I'm off a tangent here, but it's to underscore for people and why I think a one-size-fits-all solution to a problem, whenever government is giving you that, there's another reason for it. And I'm firmly convinced now that, as you said about Trump kind of being lost, and it's very obvious in the beginning of this that Trump's instincts were correct. I think you're right about that this is not that bad, or that if we are going to do something about this, we might as well just let it run. And every medical professional who is actually an infectious disease expert, and not Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's not an infectious disease expert, he's a let's kill people and give them vaccines specialist, as far as I'm concerned. He's an expert in politics. He's very good at that. He's very good at those things. They've all said the same thing, which is that the way you treat coronaviruses, period, is herd immunity. There's really no other way to treat coronaviruses, to deal with them. It's just herd immunity over time. And by locking the people who are of lowest risk to get sick and harm and overwhelm the medical infrastructure, and locking them in their homes and making them unhealthy by stressing them out, by not letting them have their social lives, and locking them in their homes, and they're away from the sun and all of this stuff, and not recommending to people they take vitamin A, D, K, zinc, and all the rest of it. I mean, when you're doing that, all you're doing is delaying the natural development of herd immunity against this virus and any mutations that come up afterwards. Okay, this is a normal everyday life. This is what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We're dealing with these things every day and now all of a sudden we're going to lock down the world because our socialist and over-socialized and under properly capitalized medical systems, which are frankly an abomination, okay, in every way of how they manage and manipulate and deploy capital. They're overstressed because this is in my mind, this is your final refutation against socialized medicine. Everywhere where there is really bad socialized medicine, people are and they're making political decisions on who to treat and who not to treat. We're seeing terrible results.
Yeah.
And we don't have any ability, as you said, we have a paycheck to paycheck economy. We have a paycheck to paycheck medical system that can't. The federal government should have been doing what Trump ultimately wound up doing, which is increasing the number of potential hospital beds and getting and mobilizing the vast supply chain and logistics infrastructure that we have in this country. And as screwed up as it is, it's still damn impressive to get care and get help and get infrastructure on a temporary or secondary basis to the hotspots. And then when that five hotspots finished and another one pops up, we move that infrastructure somewhere else. So the hospital ships, all the rest of it.
I think you're
logical to me.
Yeah, but you're hitting the nail on the head there, because you got to go to the predicate. And the predicate for this whole lockdown nation is flatten the curve. It's coming from one school of the government-funded or employed epidemiologists and infectious disease people in the country. There's a whole another school of independence, and I've been publishing some of their stuff in my blog that say exactly what you did. These viruses are airborne. Respiratory viruses can only be stopped ultimately with herd immunity, and that when you lock up everybody at home, you're actually slowing down the process of herd immunity development and spreading. And secondly, you're flattening the economy like no one has ever dreamed of doing. And in other words, the policy is ass backwards. It should have been peak the hospital capacity and the ICU capacity in these specific geographic hotspots where it was needed, but don't flatten the economy and, wipe out the livelihood of tens of millions of people and undermine the viability of tens of millions of businesses in the process. Now, as I said before, the level of laziness in the mainstream press is astounding, because the CDC itself publishes data that destroys the whole mainstream case, which is policy, which is stop the world from turning on its axis or stop this virus from spreading, when it's impossible to do. And the data that they publish showing this, and it's astounding, okay? And I just happened to run into it in the last day or so, and it just has to be cited. We've shut down all the schools in the country. We've shut down, by that I mean elementary and secondary, we've shut down all the colleges. It happens that there's 104 million people in America under the age of 24. Let's call it the school population. Do you know how many cases there have been of COVID deaths among that 104 million school population? This is through April 11th, according to the CDC's own figures. The answer is 23. 23 out of 103 million. We talk about rates per 100,000. That's 0.02. It's a crazy rounding error, and they're shutting down the whole school system. When, if you follow some of these independent epidemiologists, they're saying the school children are the ones that are supposed to spread the virus as fast as possible. They're actually the agents of herd immunity. So if we had gone in the other direction, which is assembling, targeting, and peaking the hospital and treatment capacity, the economy would be exactly where it was in early February. It wasn't Donald Trump's greatest economy ever, but it was working. And instead, we shut the whole damn thing down in a matter of weeks. And here we are today with this policy that, frankly, I think is going to be, like a tar baby that the system can't shake loose for months and months. There'll be protests all over the country. They're growing, and they should be, as a result of the crazy extremes to which this lockdown is being taken in many states, particularly by Democratic governors and mayors. And, there's something in the back of their mind that isn't just the public health as they do this. And the effort of Trump and the White House and so-called task force to try to pave the way through these guidelines to reopen the economy. And, it's instead of doing it now and doing it completely and going to a common sense policy of protecting the vulnerable, they've got all these new guidelines out, and they're basically written by the same people who green lighted this whole thing. And I can't say it strongly enough. And that is when Trump allowed Birx, Dr. Birx, so-called, the scarf lady, and Fauci to basically take over the narrative and create all these guidelines. It was just a flashing green light to every mayor and governor that wanted to exercise his muscle and get on TV every day, like Governor Cuomo. Unbelievable nonsense that he puts out every day. They all got green lighted, and now they're running rampant. And the same people that opened the door to that 5 weeks ago are now writing guidelines that will make it almost impossible to reopen the economy with any speed. Because for one is you got to go 14 days without an increase in the number of new cases. Well, for crying out loud, I could make that happen in every state by outlawing tests. Because the number of new cases are a function of the new tests. Yep. I mean, it hasn't changed. The case rate, positive so-called versus test, has been about 15 to 20% every week since the beginning of this thing in early March. So the more you test, the more cases you get, and so therefore the longer it takes to stop. I mean, we could go on about this stuff, but. So if Trump had any good advice, and he's he's home alone in the White House. I mean, there's no one with competence in the health area and epidemiology and virology and infectious disease and all the rest of it that's even remotely close to be able to give him any good advice. But I want to talk just 1 second about Dr. Fauci, you mentioned, because it turns out that he graduated, I guess, from Cornell Medical School or something, 1966. I don't know what he did for a year. He's probably dodging the draft just like I was, about the same age. Mm-hmm. And then he got hired as a researcher at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease 52 years ago, and he's been there ever since. And he's been director since '84. The guy's in an infectious disease tunnel that is so narrow that he couldn't possibly understand what goes on in the real world and what it takes to keep an economy functioning, and one that is as vulnerable and fragile as ours is because of all the nonsense in policy that's gone on. And yet there he stands, as some kind of godfather running central planning, health-based central planning in a way that was never even debated.
It's crazy. It's beyond that. And when you trace the man's connections and you trace the rest of to me, he just looks like Wesley Mouch from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. He just when I see him, I see pictures of him other than seeing Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. What I see is that guy. I see him perfectly placed to do the most amount of damage as a bureaucrat, and a bureaucrat with supposed expertise, when he's just a political figure, and he's been a political figure since the AIDS epidemic back in the 80s. And this is a man who should be rightly criticized for tying HIV to AIDS, which he was never able to prove, and all these other things. And none of this stuff has anything to do with medicine. And you and I were speaking before I hit the record button. I said it in an article that I wrote recently, the man should have his medical license revoked for violating his Hippocratic oath for do no harm. Like I said earlier, when you advocate putting people when you advocate the exact wrong policy, and when you advocate and you publish models of disease infection rates that to be fraudulent, or at the very least know that are specious, and that's fraud. That's not an honest mistake. And even if it is an honest mistake, it's one that you should not have made, because hundreds of millions of people's lives are at stake here. And when we talk about the economy, nothing ticks me off more than listening to the left virtue signal about, you're putting profit before health and all that. No, I'm not. At the end of the day, dude, the economy is our lives. What the hell do you think the economy is? It's people going about their business every day, trying to turn what their life is into what they want it to be. It's the trillions of little transactions we do every day. You can't just stop everything and hope that the disease will pass us by. It's not Passover, guys. It's not the angel of death, right? It's a virus that's in the world. Yeah. It's like trying to conquer. It's not like a hurricane. That's going to hunker down 4 days later. You hope that it passes. This is much, much different than that. And we're responding to this the same way we respond to a hurricane here in Florida. And it's ridiculous. And the man should literally be fired, arrested for malfeasance, and sued out of existence. Him and everybody else that he's connected with financially. I am absolutely and utterly incensed. I don't know about you. I have a 14-year-old daughter, right, who is literally going insane, being stuck in her house. First 4 days, she loved not having to go to school. Now she's like, I just want to see people. We're robbing our kids of their lives. We're robbing our kids of their graduations and their proms and just their life. And they're the ones, as you pointed out at the beginning, have literally effectively a 0% chance of dying from this. They're the ones who are going to create the herd immunity with their wonderfully vibrant immune systems as young people. To help build the immunity up.
Yeah, according to the epidemiologists who have studied this for 35 years, the one guy that I've quoted, he's not some tinfoil hat guy. He was head of the Department of Epidemiology and Statistics at Rockefeller University, which is a sort of medical science central in the whole country for 20 years. And he says flat out, you can't stop a respiratory virus. You've got to allow it to spread very rapidly, and you got to target and take care of the people who are in harm's way because of their age and pre-existing conditions. He just says it flat out, and he said the worst thing you can do is keep the school children at home. And let me repeat this number again, 104 school-age people in America, 24 and under, 23 deaths for the first 2 months of this whole plague. Just a rounding error in the scheme of things. And yet practically every school in the country shut down. Now, the next thing is this damn task force out there every night, talking about the statistics and, telling how they're managing everything. Has anyone ever noticed the fact, and here are the CDC data, they collect data on COVID-19 deaths either by test or because they were either confirmed or presumed, okay? Mm-hmm. And we know that what the presumed is, that is deaths that occurred mainly people over 80 from any number or any combination of morbidities, but they get classed in the death certificates right now because that's what everyone's doing. Now, here's the point I want to make to you, Tom. For the entire 2-month period in the CDC statistics from February 1 to April 11, right during the whole ramp up of this thing, there were only 13,000 deaths in the United States in that category. And the way they get the number built up is that they add cases where it's a mixture of pneumonia and COVID-19 diagnosis. But the point I'm trying to get at here is that if you take the combination that they're reporting that then gets translated into all these websites that are publishing it, and it goes on to the crawler on the screen on CNN, there's 19,000 cases during that 2-month period that is the maximum, stretchable number you could get to from the CDC data itself, which is, the official data in the United States. Do you know during that same period of 2 months, same week, same days, there were 45,000 pneumonia deaths in the United States that weren't classified as related in any way, shape, or form to COVID-19, or twice as many. And these go on day in and day out. In other words, this death cult they've created, it's not a topic anybody likes to talk about. I don't like to talk about it. No. But, we forget that during that same period, 583,000 people died in America from old age or one disease or another, cancer, hypertension, pneumonia. COVID-19, was like 3% of that during that entire period.
Right, and that 3% increase of the death rate on the medical infrastructure was something that we couldn't handle.
Yeah.
I want you to, like, when you put it in those terms, this is the curve you're flattening.
Yeah.
Okay. And even if you could make the counter argument, which of course they'll make, which is that we successfully flattened the curve, and that's prima facie evidence that we did the right thing. Well, no, not necessarily, because we're seeing what happened when they did this exact same thing in China. Now they're dealing with a second wave of infection rates now that they've opened Wuhan back up. The thing about it is that, and then we have a similar situation, or not a similar situation, in Sweden, where they're done with it. They've got herd immunity in Sweden at this point, and they never locked the country down. Now, you could argue that there's differences between the Swedes and Americans and blah blah blah. Yeah, I'll make one for you: 32 people per square mile in the United States, as opposed to like 150 or 170 in Italy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huge difference. Now, in the places where we have high concentrations of people, with high concentrations of high risk people, and a high degree of use of public transportation, why are we shocked that we have a huge outsized effect in New York City? If anybody should be outraged, it should be New Yorkers and the rest of us for having shut down our entire national economy because de Blasio and Cuomo didn't want to admit that the virus was real up until it became a real pandemic locally that they could use politically to grind their political axis. As far as I'm concerned, both of them should be brought up on malfeasance charges as well and thrown out of office. Cuomo shouldn't be running for president to replace Biden. Cuomo should be literally hanged.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, these people, it's terrible.
Yeah, but let me amplify that further, because you're hitting right at some serious pay dirt here. Again, stuff that's right there in the wealth of CDC data that nobody's talking about, and is like it's not a smoking gun, it's a smoking howitzer. Okay, and here's the case: if this thing were the Black Plague taking down the country, young, old, healthy, unhealthy, anybody in its path in some kind of 14th century way, we would be having excess deaths in the United States during February, March, and April as a result of this Black Plague that they keep talking about. The fact is, the CDC, is the keeper of all these statistics, and they publish what is the expected total death rate each week and month based on the last 3 years adjusted for population. Mm-hmm. And what we see is that during the period of early February through the 11th of April, the death rate in the United States was 582,000 people. But that was only 92% of the expected rate of 633,000. I know who wants to talk about all these deaths, but if it really were the Black Plague, the thing would be way the hell above the expected normal rate, right? Right. Okay, that's my first point. Now listen to the second point. That's the United States as a whole. Yeah. But if we look at New York City as one little pod, the 8.84 million people there, and the rest of the United States, the 320 million people in the rest of the United States, what we get is in New York City, the actual deaths have been running at 175% of the expected, whereas in the rest of the country, they've been running at 90% or below the expected. So what we have is a super radioactive hotspot in New York City for reasons which take another whole conversation having to do with, population mix and age and health status and so forth. But the only place that there's anything that remotely looks like, excess deaths, Black Plague phenomena is in New York City, and yet the whole damn country is being shut down during a season in which the total death rate is running well below norm, and counting all the COVIDs and all the pneumonias.
And think of it this way, David. What are you doing there? If you want to actually help the people in New York who are under this Black Plague, for lack of a better term, under this Black Plague, what's the best way to help them? Shut down the rest of the productive economy to not make not make food and not make masks and not make ventilators, not make any of the stuff, or keep everything flowing so that we can allocate capital where it needs to go. I'll go one better for you, David. Right? During about a month ago, watching various YouTube channels and whatnot, going over the actual numbers in Europe during the height of Italy's, when Italy was imploding up north in the northern part of Italy, the actual death rate, right, as a percentage on a historical basis, which I saw tracked in Germany, Spain, Italy, the UK, all of these places, not above baseline. Wavering no more than 0.2 or 0.3% to the upside and the downside on a week-to-week basis. Absolutely. As at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, this is an operation. This is an operation. This is a political operation to push mandatory vaccination. And I'm so very happy that people glommed on to the whole Bill Gates angle on this very quickly. Because I'm sorry, but they done screwed up here. They done went for everything all at once. And it looks to me like the minute somebody figured out the hydroxychloroquine would stop this thing, they were all like, uh-oh, we're in trouble now. And that's why they went nuts trying to stop anybody talking about hydroxychloroquine, because they thought they were going to be able to give the vaccine. They were going to be able to keep us locked down under fear for another 18 months to 2 years, get Trump out of office, complete the medical coup, the medical industrial coup, because they couldn't do it through Russiagate and they couldn't do it through Ukraine Gate. So now we're going to do it through COVID Gate or whatever you want to call it. And that was their plan. And then some Hasidic doctor in my hometown, literally next to my hometown, there was I don't know if you saw the first real report of what was going on. It was a Hasidic doctor, Jewish doctor in Kiryas Joel, which is, I grew up in Highland Mills, New York, and Kiryas Joel is between Highland Mills and Monroe. I mean, it's like literally adjacent to my my stomping grounds where I grew up. And I saw that, and he's treating people with 100% success rate. And I'm like, and then I hit like the New York Post, and then the whole thing just collapsed. Yeah. And the whole narrative started to collapse. And that's and everybody's face fell on CNN, and they didn't know what to do. All they could do was double down. All they could do was double down.
What they've done is just suppress any information that's not consistent with the narrative. Right. But this happens in real time. This happens in real time with real developments and events. And I tell you, Trump, he probably didn't know why, but he had the right instinct here. He was resisting this all along until the so-called IHME, that's the institute in the University of Washington that's Gates funded entirely, came up with these fantastic projections of deaths, upwards of 1 million in the United States. And those filtered through Fauci and the Scarf Lady. They scared the living bejesus out of Trump and Jared and the rest of the know-nothings around him. And so they gave him a stage. And when poor Donald Trump found out he couldn't do his rallies, he decided to have reality TV every day. And it was a catastrophic mistake because he put his enemies on the screen to basically validate a hypothesis, a model of what should be done that is massacring the economy and leaving him high and dry, to say nothing of tens of millions of people who are taking it in the chin as we speak. So that's where it happened. That's where it happened right then. And had people not plugged into that network, and obviously, there's Fauci has been kind of an acolyte of that whole vaccination lobby for a long, long time. It never would have gotten to this level, because if they weren't having this stupid task force report every day. I don't think these governors, like the governor of my home state of Michigan, shut down everything. By the way, including they've roped off, if you go to like a Walmart or the equivalents out in Michigan, the gardening section of these superstores, they're closed. You can't buy petunias to plant. Okay,
to go out in the sun and plant petunias, and while you're sitting at home doing nothing on your home outside, there's not any evidence whatsoever that this is transmissible while we're outside. You're in the sun. I mean, down here in Florida, we said. I chatted with a friend of mine and I for months and leading up to this saying, this is Florida. High humidity, high heat, lots of sunshine and vitamin D. This thing's it's not gonna do anything. We're gonna have a little bit of trouble in like Miami-Dade and Broward, where there's a high concentration, possibly like places like Collier and Fort Myers, Collier County, like Naples and Fort Myers, with a high concentration of older people. But honestly, older people from New York come to Florida to get healthy for their last few years before passing on. That's why they moved to Florida, because they live on the coast and in the sun and the sand and the sea air, and it extends their life, extended my mom's life by 10 years. Like, I'm not, no lie here, right? And so at the end of the day, it's like, it's insane. And I was going to make a point when you were speaking that I wanted to bring up. Oh, and this is the other thing that no one's talking about. So what we got, 13,000 COVID deaths? How many deaths from suicide are there going to be over the next 6 months from people who've lost their jobs and have no hope? How many people are going to die? How many men are going to die of stress-related heart attacks because they can't make their mortgage payments? How many people are going to die from complications from type 2 diabetes? How many people didn't get treated in hospitals because they were turning people away because they were allocating all the resources to prepare for COVID-19? These are the numbers I want to know. As always, there is what Frederick Bastiat termed back in 1850, what is seen, treating for COVID-19, and what is unseen. So we're going to stop the world from dying from that, and we're going to kill 5 times the number of people in order to stop those 15,000 people from dying. And if this thing comes down to, because they started with 1 million or 2 million Americans were going to die, then it was 240,000, now it's 60,000, next week it'll be 30,000. And how many people, and how many lives have been ruined for this?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is, now that these forecasts have just collapsed in real time before everybody's eyes, what they're doing really is inflating the reporting. In other words, CDC changed its standards. So now what they report is both the confirmed as well as the presumed COVID related.
We're having a little bit of technical difficulty today between David and I. So if there's some jump cuts in here, we'll just have to live with it.
Yeah. Well, I was saying the same thing. In other words, now that these forecasts, these scary forecasts, have collapsed entirely in real time within a matter of weeks, they're sort of trying to make up for it by overcoding in the death certificates that follow CDC standards to get the number up. It's clear that 90% of these cases, it's in the CDC's own numbers, and the New York statistics are overwhelming, are people that have hypertension or diabetes or blood diseases or respiratory illnesses, and it's not for sure what caused what, but that's what they're counting, because they're just trying to inflate the number to cover their rear. And in the meanwhile, Washington is, in a state of total hysteria, throwing money like never before. Listen to this. They're going to spend over $7 trillion in this fiscal year, and at the rate at which the revenues are collapsing because there's no economic activity going on, they'll be under $3 trillion. We're gonna end up with a deficit damn near $4 trillion in the current year, nearly 20% of GDP. This is crazy. This isn't World War II. This isn't Germany and Japan. This is a disease that studies have now shown, that came out over the weekend, particularly that one in Santa Clara County, California, the ultimate death rate per exposed person, when they find out that most of the a very significant fraction of the population has been exposed anyway, is 0.1, 0.2,
Yep.
a tenth of 1%. And you basically bankrupted the country in order to hold harmless against a shutdown that never should have happened. This is out of this world.
It is out of this world, and I'm going to I'll two things to wrap up. Ready? One, the Danes came to that same conclusion in a study published last week, and so did the Germans, right between 0.1 and 0.3%. And
right.
Which makes it no more or less, makes it a little bit more deadly than the flu. And yeah, you should respect the disease. No one here is saying that we shouldn't respect the disease, that you shouldn't, if you're in high risk, that you shouldn't, take precautions and all the rest of it. But this is, at the end of the day, life is risk, and it is what it is. And we have to be strong enough, smart enough, and brave enough to make good decisions about how it is that we're going to go back to work and move on with our lives, because the truth of the matter is that we live with diseases this deadly all the time. And my final point this morning, and I'm going to let you go, is the following. If this was a normal year where there wasn't an incipient financial crisis already brewing because the dollar funding markets have been seizing up behind the scenes, and all of this wasn't going to already collapse on its own, they would have spent the entire time trying to downplay the deadliness of this disease. They wouldn't have named it. They wouldn't have covered it. They would have done everything imaginable. And it would have been the kooks on the fringes going, what is it with this weird respiratory disease that's killing, and that's where it would have stayed in the shadows. It would have stayed in Alex Jonesville, for lack of a better term, as opposed to them bringing it all the way to the front. When they bring it to the front like this, the way they've done it, this is an operation in my mind. There is no other way to describe it. And this is all this is a way for them. This is an excuse. This is an excuse, is all I'm trying to say. So, all righty. So, David, I appreciate your time and everything, and we're going to have to cut this call off because it's obvious that we're having connection problems.
Okay.
So,
all right, great. Good to talk to you, and more to follow.
Absolutely, David. Thank you so much for your time, and sorry about the connection and all of that stuff today. But you have a great day, and be safe and all of that great stuff, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, great. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast. I'm really sorry about the technical difficulties that David and I were having towards the end. Knowing that his connection was kind of poor, I just kind of took the conversation over just so we could finish it up in some way that actually made some sense. So, as always, you can follow my work over at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can also sign up for the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns investment newsletter over at my Patreon at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns. I'm going to let you all go. We've got a lot to deal with for the rest of this week. And as always, be safe, take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.